or possibly somebody making disinfectant, or any of those kind of things. It's going to be good quite soon. One other thing I'm going to ask you to do is to please mute your microphones, and then we can unmute them later if necessary. And your questions you can put into the chat window. So is that okay with everybody? I'm assuming the answer to that is going to be yes. Ah, there's Karina. Now, Karina, you're due for a test. Can you hear me okay? You can, good. I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
I can, but that's great. I just wanted to test with somebody just to make sure. But can you just mute your microphone? Thank you very much, along with everybody else. And then we can, like I say, we can unmute them if it's useful to do that later. Just note your questions as you go along. We always like to do questions at the end. It's more practical that way, because often questions get answered anyway in the course, this kind of thing. So here's who we are. So for those people who don't know us, I'm Phil Edwards, and I'm the co-founder of Transformations Institute, which has been functioning for over a decade and a half in the Middle East now. And this gives you an idea of some of the things that we do, and gives you an idea of some of the organisations that credit our courses. We like to show this one off. This is us winning our award for the best school of the year, which we won twice, so that's not bad going. So we're quite pleased with that. Lets you know that we're serious, doesn't it? And before we get started, before we do all this other stuff that we're going to do, I would just like to give you an indication, because this is about coping with this current situation where it seems that a large part of the world are under house arrest for a crime that they never committed. While we're in this situation, there are people who are coping in various different ways. And so I'd like to show just a few pictures about how some people are coping. Now, I think most of these people...
Phil, I hate to interrupt, but could we ask people to mute their microphones if they're not speaking, because there's a lot of feedback coming through.
Is that, yeah, I have already said that. I have already asked people to mute.
There's a lot of people haven't used them yet. I just wanted to...
Okay, can you always please check your mics and make sure they're muted. You should have a little, if you're not familiar with this, you should have a little red mic symbol with a red line through it. In fact, it should all be red, in which case it's okay, because otherwise it gives other people problems. Okay, I think most people have got enough problems already. So here's how some people are coping with the current situation. And you might, I mean, these are real pictures in real places. You might find some inspiration in some of these images. Are these things that you might want to do? I mean, I really like the guy on the right in this picture, the guy outside the coach there. I think that's very imaginative. These people are obviously taking it seriously. And finally, I think this one's my favorite. I think the last one here on the right is my favorite, but it's a tough call, you know, because these are seriously creative people. Now, I want that to kind of set the stage, because we do want to get creative about the situation that we're in at the moment. So, coping with the COVID-19 lockdown, transcending fear and generating self-empowerment with applied positive psychology. So there's your big scary COVID virus, and here's what we really do want to do with it. So let's get down to business. As we move through this together, my voice will talk to your conscious mind, while the images you see will talk to your unconscious mind. Everything in this presentation has been created to have a certain effect. And so as you pay attention to the words and the images, to your conscious and to your unconscious, you can begin to notice that a new understanding is created from the combination of these two kinds of awareness. And this new understanding is essential. Everybody likes to quote Einstein on this one, don't they? That you can't solve a problem from the same consciousness in which you created the problem. And Dr. Joe Dispenza talks about this idea that human beings can only think within the emotional field that they've generated. So one way or another, we have to get out of the emotional field that we're in. We have to stop generating that, and we have to generate something new. Now, I know lots of people here that are going to be familiar with many of these ideas already. And so For you, perhaps we can add a little bit more depth, or perhaps it will stimulate you to have even more good ideas than you have already. We have a quote here from Virginia Satir. Now, Virginia Satir is one of the 3 major therapists that Richard Bandler originally studied in order to create neuro-linguistic programming. And she says, life is not what it's supposed to be, it's what it is. It's the way you cope with it that makes the difference. And that's what we're concerned with. And we're talking about reframing, and reframing being the key to coping, not just with this current situation, but with any and all situations. So reframing is essentially discovering or creating a new, more self-empowering meaning in the circumstances or the situations in our life. So the conditions are what they are. You may well have married the wrong person. It may well be illegal for you to leave your apartment. You may well have some illness. We all have things that we deal with, but it's how we deal with them that makes the difference, and that can transcend what the actual circumstances are. So reframing is the key to getting positive results and from a negative situation. And reframing as a concept is also the key, the foundation that everything in this little seminar is going to be built on. So buildings have a structure. So here's the structure for this particular presentation. So first, we're going to define reframing. Second, we'll give a practical example. Third, we'll look at the psychological mechanism that can transform negativity into creativity. Fourth, we'll consider the neurological and biochemical process involved. And you can interchange those words if you like. You can say neurochemical and biological. It really doesn't make any difference, because we're talking about the processes that take place within the human neurology, within a human brain and body, which involves electricity, chemical processes, physical processes. All these things happen simultaneously. And fifth, we'll introduce a few practical techniques so that you have things here that you can use immediately. So again, if you already know this stuff, you can enhance it, you can look into it more deeply perhaps. And if it's new to you, then that'll be a great thing, that you can just take these new techniques and start to use them. And I don't know about you, but I often find, I return to things again and again. There are books that I read once every 5 or 10 years to discover new things in those books. There are techniques, methods of meditation, things that I do that I then leave, sometimes literally for years, and then come back to. And it's really like having an old friend, a good friend, where you can just pick up where you left off. So for those for whom it's new, this is good. This will be new stuff you can work with. And for those for whom it's not so new, perhaps to develop further and look into more deeply. So let's get started. Oh yeah, and at the end of all that, then we'll have time for a few questions if that's useful to people. Now, here's a little story about someone. This is a true story about a real person who reframed a personal problem and made it into a global solution. You may have heard of this guy. I'm going to assume you can all read really quickly as I go through this. This is George de Mestral, Swiss electrical engineer, who had a dog, liked to take his dog for a walk in the country. And I don't know if you've had this experience, if you have a dog, or even if you just go for a walk. This thing's called burdock, from the burdock plant. It flowers, and then it has a seed pod, and then the genius of the burdock is that it has these little hooks on it, which enable it to attach itself to things. And so that way it gets to move around, it gets to spread around. And I like the story because it's a nice, simple metaphor that you can read on several levels. So here's George, and this is the problem he had. And so he took a look at these burrs under a microscope. And that's when something interesting happened, because this is what he discovered. So on the right there, what you can see is what the burrs look like. And on the left there, you can see something that is approximately like a dog's fur or sheep's fur or tweed trousers or whatever. And so this is what we all know as Velcro. So George, by taking a close look at a situation which was a problem to him, a situation that repeated and that he thought he was stuck with, by taking a close look at it, was able to create something entirely new. So that's why I like this as a metaphor, because sometimes, and we work with people in this way all the time in individual therapy and coaching, in our classes and our courses. Sometimes we need to look at things really, really from a distance. We need to zoom up, get the big picture, get the whole picture, get the big context. And that's a very useful thing to do right now with the thing that's going on with the COVID and COVID concept, I'm going to call it, in the world. It's very useful to pan out, zoom out, and find out what else is involved in this process. And it's also very useful to zoom right in, to chunk right down, and to look at things in detail, to get the microscope out. Now, sometimes when you look at things from a big distance and when you look at them in minute detail, what you find is new information. You learn things that you didn't know before. Once you have this new information, then you can do new things. It's difficult to do new things with old information. So it's always useful to do that. So that's what happened for George, and that's how we got to have all those Velcro things we've got today, all those trainers and stuff, and people being able to conveniently manipulate their spacesuits when they're on the moon. And here's a concept that is fundamental to all this kind of work. And it's something that's frequently overlooked. And we've used this quote from Viktor Frankl to illustrate it. Now, there are other people, many people who've worked with this concept. Robert Fritz, the person who invented dimensional macrostructural alignment and structural consulting, also came up with this concept or highlighted it, which is that we always have a choice. And I say that because it's often overlooked. It's very easy to just forget you do. But sometimes the choice is really only in your own minds. You might be in a situation where everything else is controlled or restricted, and it might seem that there is nothing you can do, but there is always something you can do. The thing you can always do is to make a choice. And you always have a choice within your own mind about what kind of a choice you take. If you've studied NLP or if you've studied other related ways of working with the mind, then you'll be aware that there are bad strategies and good strategies, but there are processes that just take place within our own minds, sometimes just below the level of consciousness, which, if we can notice them and if we can change them, then we can change many, many, many things. So it might seem sometimes that just making a change in your own mind doesn't make any difference, but it always makes a difference in some way. And you won't necessarily know what that difference is until you experience the result of that choice that you've made. So the choice will change things, but how it will change things, we don't know until we get the results. And we often don't know when we'll get the results. Now, sometimes, and every good therapist and coach will know this is true, sometimes you're with somebody in a session and they just make a choice and suddenly their whole life changes. All kinds of things happen. Sometimes they heal themselves of a physical problem. Sometimes they suddenly are able to make more money or have better relationships or whatever, simply by making a choice. But it's not always that obvious, but the choice is key, absolutely key. And we like to quote Viktor Frankl here, and we'll come back to him shortly. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. And as I say, we'll come back to him, talk a bit more about him, and the point that he touches on there, because it's also a point that relates to other things too. You can find the same idea in schools of meditation and in ideas about transcending ourselves. Now, transcending ourselves is what we have to do in order to make new things happen. Now, I've got a couple of slides here about the automatic process, the bad strategy, if you like, that all human beings seem to have. Now, it seems to be kind of biological. I'm going to use the term brain and mind interchangeably in this. It seems to be biological, seems to be built in, hardwired in us in order to protect us at a simple, primitive level. One of those things that many neuroscientists are saying nowadays has been there for millions of years, and that's why we're still here, because we have this process. But it doesn't serve us well in many situations in the lives that most of us have now. But here's how it works. So this just represents the timeline of any person. Here is your life just going along, things are ticking over, things are doing whatever they do. You maybe have a certain job, certain relationships, certain beliefs, whatever. There'll be a package in place there, and that will be your understanding of life, and that's how you move along. At some point, for everybody, at some point, and for those who are interested in Buddhism, in Buddhist psychology, we like a lot, and we always teach a little bit of it, but just a matter of interest, one of the things they say in Buddhism is that you can't avoid suffering. And I think everybody can think of examples where something's gone wrong. We're talking about this in relation to COVID and the lockdown and how we deal with it and so on, but these principles apply across the board through life. At some point, a bad experience comes along. So at the moment, as I say, we're relating it to COVID. That's the big bad experience that's happening and affecting so many people in so many ways. But whatever it is, it's bad. It interferes with your timeline. It stops things for a moment. Things don't continue. You don't think the same way. You don't feel the same way. Maybe you don't have the same job or the same relationship. Maybe you don't have the same health. something happens. We're just going to call it a bad experience. And that bad experience prevents your normal progress in life, both internally and externally. Now, what normally happens after that is an automatic process kicks in the brain or mind in which there's a negative thinking and feeling loop. Now, this really is a loop. So this, and again, this is something we all know. None of the things that we're going to talk about this evening are going to be things we don't already know. We can all just look inside. We can all just notice our own thought processes and feeling processes and recognize these things. So you go into this mode where you keep repeating the same video over and over again of whatever the bad thing is. And as a result, you get the same feelings, you get the same thoughts, and you also get the same physiological responses, because what you think affects your body. And in fact, emotions are chemical events in your body. So there's no separation really between these things. So there you are, just watching this bad video, maybe for the rest of your life, unless you do something about it. And what that tends to do, now I'm just going to call this PTS, because people have come up with this thing, post-traumatic stress disorder. We don't like the word disorder. There's no disorder. Being stressed by trauma is normal. It's natural. It even has a good function, a survival function in the human mind and body system. So there's no reason to have an extra word in there. It simply is post-traumatic stress. Post means after you've had some trauma, i.e. something painful on whatever level. So now you're stressed. Well, of course you are. So no need to say anything else about it. But what happens, you see the down arrow going down to the PTS, what happens is then people find themselves in this repetitive state where just the same thing keeps happening over and over again. And people have big trouble getting out of this sometimes, which is why we all have jobs as therapists and coaches and so on, because people have these issues. Now, life after that usually isn't so good. People's lives are generally diminished in some way. And if this loop here, if this negative loop and this downward thrust, if those things are powerful, then people really can go downhill. And it's not unusual for people to even become physically ill. And we were just looking at some of the reports coming in about how people are responding during this lockdown period that's going on in so many places at the moment. The statistics for domestic abuse have risen just in the short time that this is going on. Husbands, and it usually is that way around, husbands are already beating up their wives more. I'm sure the people looking in on this now, if their husbands are not those kind of husbands, but oh, there's somebody nodding vigorously there. Maybe maybe somebody is that kind. But you know, this is just normal. This is what happens if you stress people. They freak out. When they freak out, they start to do things that are supposedly for their improved survival, but in fact usually mess up their survival in some way by messing up their relationships and impeding their ability to function. So this is just, for me, a convenient diagram of a process that we all know and identify with. There's an alternative. Now this is what, and we've taken this term from Fritz's dimensional macrostructural alignment, what we call the access point. Now when something bad happens, and I've said this to people before, when I get sick, I tend to think, oh good, I've got something I can work with. I've got something I can research. I'm not saying I delight in being sick. I don't particularly enjoy the sensations of being sick. But when those things happen to me, I learn. I go and I deliberately, consciously seek new information to solve the problem. And I almost never go to a medical professional because I don't trust them. And this seminar is not the place to go into that in detail. But that's my take on life. That was my parents' take on life. I think they were right, and I continue to propagate that. And I find it works. It works. When I get sick for a fraction of the time that many other people I know do. Don't talk to me about 2 and 3 weeks flu. You know, I'll take it for 2 days. I'm not interested in any more. Now, this is because there are things that we can do, and this is part of what we're talking about here. Now, this awareness of these negative automatic responses are what we can change, and which will change things enormously. Now, there's a German doctor, and for those of you who speak German, I would really invite you, because I can't do this, because all I can say in German is Gesundheit and things like that, which is probably, you know, quite useful at the moment. But you go and look at somebody called Dr. Hamer, who created something that became known as the New German Medicine. But Dr. Hamer found that what was happening with brain scans is that every single person who developed cancer, when they'd had a brain scan, that there would be, long before the cancer came along, that there would be a little blip in the brain, a little shape or a little mark. You have to read this yourself, like all these things when I talk about this evening. And what Dr. Hamer found was that nobody ever got cancer without this blip first appearing in the brain of all the people that he studied. And what he also found is that all the doctors and surgeons and people doing brain scans disregarded these little blips because they were too symmetrical. Now, for those of you who know NLP, just meta-model this. Too symmetrical for what? You know, think about what happens when we analyze language and how language keeps people trapped. Dr. Hamer found he could predict not only when people were likely to have cancer, but how bad it would be and where in their body they might have it. All because he noticed something that everybody else dismissed. Now, they all dismissed it because it was too simple. He thought, well, if it's there, it means something. It's not just a glitch in the machinery. You know, if the machinery is wrong, we should fix it. If it's showing something that's not there, but if we're not fixing it, then it must be there. So this is many things, so many people like this. So what happened with Hamer is he discovered also that the blip that showed up in the brain would be in exactly the part of the brain that related to that part of the body, organs and so on, which subsequently would develop cancer. Now, that's all I'm going to say about that, and I really invite you to do your own research on this one. But there's so much information like this out there, perfectly good, valid information from real doctors and real scientists, all of which indicate that the way we respond internally can make a huge difference to what then happens in our bodies, and certainly what happens externally. So here's your timeline going along, and here's your bad experience, which just pops out of nowhere. Now we have a choice now, so we're not going to do the usual thing. So we look at this and we say, well, this is interesting because this is an access point, because this is a point where normally, and we say an access point because it's an access point to the unconscious mind, to a negative process that would normally automatically take place. If we apply our conscious mind to this, it doesn't have to take place, because what we can do is we can make an intervention. We can make an intervention with our conscious mind, and we can choose to look at that thing that's happening and to start to think about it in a new way. Now, also, when we say intervention here, I'm going to mean also a therapeutic intervention, especially for all the therapists that are online at the moment with this. There are many, many different ways we can intervene. We've studied many different systems and taught many of them, and you know, had trainers in to teach them and so on. We continue to do that. One of the things that we found again and again is that this is always present. This has to happen, otherwise there isn't a problem. So whether we're talking psychological problems, emotional problems, physical problems, social problems, this has to happen, and then that negative thing has to happen. And if it's going to change, this has to happen. Now, your intervention can be from any number of, there are so many good therapies and good systems, but something has to be done to turn this into a conscious process. Now, when we do that and we make it a conscious process, then what we get is a kind of a virtuous loop instead of a vicious cycle. So what we get now is we get something that happens which is positive and creative, because we're now learning as we do this. And so the forward movement of the timeline will also be positive. But that's not the only thing that happens when we do this. What also happens when we do this is we start to get increased knowledge. Because we haven't just accepted that this is the way I feel, or these are the way the circumstances are, but we've examined the circumstances, whatever they may be, and start to ask ourselves the question about, is there something I could know? Is there more I could know about this? If I put the birds under the microscope, will I see something useful? And then we tend to develop new skills. We find out that when we have more knowledge, then we can also have more skill. I think these things usually go together. It's hard to imagine you could have skill without knowledge somehow. They have to go in tandem. When you have increased knowledge, new skills, you will inevitably have greater understanding, because you'll be applying those skills, you'll be checking on that knowledge and finding out where and how it works. And when you have all those things in place, then there will be a deeper meaning to your life. Now, Viktor Frankl, that we mentioned earlier, wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning, and he created what was a new kind of therapy at the time called logotherapy, which means the therapy of meaning. And he believed that the most important thing for human beings was meaning. If you don't have meaning, everything else just falls apart. Everything else disappears. And once again, this is an interesting thing to check out for yourself. Look around at those people that have meaning and what their meaning is. And does that help them, and how does it help them? And how do they compare with the people who have no meaning? Is it different for them? Now, all of this creates something called more self-actualization. Self-actualization is a concept created by a psychologist called Abraham Maslow, or Abraham Maslow, I think it is. And what Abraham Maslow discovered, he was kind of one of the forerunners of what we now call positive psychology. He's one of the earliest people to say, well, actually, it's not that people are completely messed up. It's that they need to develop more. So that will happen if you treat this as an access point and you start to consciously change things. Now, your brain already knows how to do this. The reason your brain already knows how to do this is because the process of making internal representations that are powerful is probably one of the main reasons that we're all still here as a species. Is because after the lion or the saber-toothed tiger had eaten your sister or your brother back those millions of years ago when things were very primitive, you retained a powerful image of that in your mind, and you carried that image around with you, and in that image would have been all the details, all the things that happened just before it pounced. And so that's what enabled you to survive, because you knew the signs. So our brains have this automatic function of representing the negative, scary, bad stuff to us. So whenever anything negative, scary, and bad happens in life, our brains will tend to keep representing that to us to do its best to protect us from it. But of course, some situations you can't be protected from it, it's just there. So with the COVID lockdown at the moment, it's just there. And generally speaking, I mean, where I live at the moment, you know, if I go out and I don't wear a mask and gloves and I go out and I just stand around on a street corner, or if I go for a walk, I can be arrested. I can be fined or imprisoned. And I know this is true in many, many countries. In some countries, in some third world countries, people are getting beaten up. Poorer people are getting beaten by the police and thrown into prison and so on, just, you know, summarily, you know. And I know in Britain, for instance, we now have parts in the UK, places in the UK, where we actually have the army enforcing what is essentially martial law. So now this is something you can't really change very much unless you're going to lead a rebellion or you're going to go out there and become a martyr or something. You might decide you're going to have to go along with this for a bit. What we can change is what's in here. We can always change what's in here, and this is what can lead to a change in every other level too. So bear in mind, your brain already automatically makes vivid images, represents them to your mind, and your brain cannot tell the difference. Your brain or your mind cannot tell the difference between a real image from outside or an imaginary image from inside. Now, this is both a curse and a blessing. This is why you can have a phobia, because if you're carrying around a picture of a spider and you're scared of spiders, your physiology will react in exactly the same way as if a spider's there, even if it's not. You only have to hear the word. Similarly, if you can create an image of something that is truly inspiring to you, or of something that you really love, then your physiology will respond to that. And then you will have a positive experience, which enables you to generate more positive experiences. Now, one of the things they say in martial arts, which is very paradoxical, is that the more relaxed you can be, and the more you don't care about the outcome, the more lethal you can be to your opponent. This sounds paradoxical, but it does seem to be true. And I think the same is true of many things, and people call this a state of flow. You know, Csikszentmihalyi, the guy who got the whole positive psychology thing going in Harvard, came up with this concept of flow. When you're totally focused on something, then all of your inner resources are activated. So if we're going to be more able to deal with difficult external circumstances and extra pressures on relationships, we need to, 1, be relaxed, 2, be detached, and 3, to have that positivity and that energy. Here's just a little graphic on what actually happens in the brain. So we have a whole load of data, a whole load of information. Now we've got the example of being angry, the little cartoon image of being angry, but it could be anything. It could be fear. It could be a sense of suffocation. It could be something, it could be frustration. It could be anything you like. Fear and anger are the 2 big ones, and they usually go together. They usually are joined together in some way or another. They're the 2 modes of the primitive brain. This information will stimulate the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland will send chemicals down into your body. And here we have the classic, the adrenal glands perched on top of the kidneys. The adrenal glands will secrete adrenaline and cortisol. Once they do that, they will cause physiological changes in your body, which will either be interpreted as anger or fear, as these chemicals course through your system and make all kinds of things happen. And then what will happen is the experiences you have within your body and the experiences you have emotionally will feed back into your brain, And then your brain will tend to be in a state of anger, in a state of fear, in a state of confusion. If you're unlucky, all three simultaneously. And from that state, you will be doing your very best to cope with the situation. Of course, your ability to cope is going to be somewhat impaired by having all these random and rampant emotions going on simultaneously. So the important point here is that's what your brain already knows how to do. We don't have to teach it to do anything new. We just have to start showing it a different movie. We just have to start consciously, deliberately presenting our brains with something new, and it will do the work for us. Now, there are a million studies on this. Again, after this seminar, if some of this stuff is news to you, go out and look into some of the studies. They're from some of the best universities in the world. They're some of the greatest religious spiritual traditions, and they all come together and agree on the same thing. They all say, this is how it works. This is fundamental. Our conscious mind has the job of feeding the subconscious mind stuff that it can work with in a creative way. It can't do that. It can do all the other stuff, but it can't do that. Our conscious mind has to do this. That's where the choice element comes in. Now, I said we'd have a few stories. Now, again, you can find, I don't know how many of these stories. You know, every time I go online to look for them, I'm overwhelmed by the sheer quantity of inspiring people and astonishing creativity. I'm just going to come up with a few here. It's a few, you know, almost chosen at random. Almost, because, you know, I did have an agenda, but agendas change sometimes when you're going through things. Now, everybody knows Nelson Mandela, I think. So this is the guy who wanted black people to be free and to have equal rights with white people in South Africa, because after all, they were there first. And you probably know the story. Very popular, well-known person. He was locked up. He spent many years in prison. Now, I'm not asking you know, you to make moral judgments about Nelson Mandela. You may or may not like him. You may think what he did was good, or you may think it was bad, or you may be indifferent. What I'm asking you to do is think about what he did while he was in prison, because that's quite serious to be a lockdown. So he's actually in prison for years, and while he was there, he studied and he petitioned and he continued to organise people. And the final result was that he got, from political pressure from abroad, he was eventually released and he became the president of South Africa. You may not want to be the president of South Africa. You may want to do something different. Now here's a leap to somebody totally different. This is Milarepa. We couldn't get a photograph of Milarepa because he lived about 1,000 years before photography was invented, so we had to use this picture. But Milarepa was a saint in Tibet. Milarepa chose to isolate himself. He didn't wait for the virus to lock down, or he didn't have to be locked up or put in prison or anything else. He chose to go and live his life in a cave. And you'll find again in I think probably all spiritual traditions, in all religions and societies, there are traditions of people like this. People who chose to be alone so that they could really create a new way of working with their own minds. And usually the result of that has been that for hundreds and sometimes thousands of years, people continue to be by example. Here's Viktor Frankl's book, Essential Reading. Viktor Frankl was a doctor in the time of the Nazi takeover of Germany, and he was sent to Auschwitz. And I won't tell you a lot of detail of these things because we don't have time for all that, but it's worth reading about. The key thing about Frankl, a couple of key things, is one, he took with him his intention, his mission. Just before he was locked up, he'd begun to work on a book in which he wanted to develop a new form of therapy, called logotherapy. Now, obviously he wasn't able to do that in Auschwitz. They weren't that supportive. But he kept the idea alive in his mind. He continually thought about it and worked on it. And again, you can in similar situations, you did similar things. Now, the other thing he did is he presented his mind with positive, very powerful visual images day after day. And again, read the book and he'll tell you how he did it. He would imagine in vivid detail, really vivid detail, so that he created an alternative reality inside himself. At the end of the Second World War, when he was released from Auschwitz, he went to the USA, he wrote his book, he created a new form of therapy, he set up a clinic and lived the rest of his life doing excellent work and really helping people. Now for the cowboy. This is Brandon Sample. Now, I started, when I was looking for a few new inspirational stories for this, I thought about some of these people I've heard of who got locked up and then became lawyers while they were in prison, which I think is a brilliant idea. It really is, you know, apply to self, you know, find the exception in the rule. So you lock these guys up, and instead of them, you know, becoming a even worse criminal, they become a lawyer, and then they come out afterwards, and they help people. So here's Brandon Sample. So he was sentenced to 14 years in prison in 2001. And so basically he just said, and it was a white collar crime, he didn't kill anybody or anything, but it was to do, apparently my notes tell me it was to do with US postal stamps. Don't ask me. US postage stamps and stolen checks. So I don't know the details. But what happened is he studied law. He became a lawyer, he came out, and go and look at his website. He now advocates specifically for people who have been over-sentenced, wrongly sentenced, and so on. Now, here's another one of my favorite. Morris Caberia. Morris Caberia. Oops, Fyodor Dostoevsky. Where's my picture of Morris? Oh yeah, now I don't know what you're seeing on your screen, but my video has covered up Morris. I've just had to reveal him again. This is, I hope you can see Morris Caberia there in his sweater. Morris Caberia was a Kenyan policeman for 9 years who was then framed for some reason. Again, don't ask. If you're Kenyan, you might know more than I do about these things. But he was framed and he was sentenced to death. He was arrested in 2005. He was sentenced to hang in 2013. So imagine he had 7 years being in prison, thinking that he was going to die at some point. So he studied law. I mean, obvious choice. So he studied law. And he started representing himself in court. And this is something Brandon Sample did as well. These people actually started running their own court cases while they were still in prison, running their own appeals, going up against, you know, the best prosecution lawyers in their respective countries. Sample is a US citizen, coming up against the best prosecution lawyers and lawyers, and actually beating them, overcoming them. And so he gained his freedom. And once again, became an advocate in his own right, and now works with people who have been wrongly sentenced, or in some cases have been rightly sentenced, but are being wrongly treated, which is also not really the best way forward. Here's Dostoevsky. You may have heard of him if you're a fan of Russian literature. Fairly famous, probably well known, most well known for Crime and Punishment, Brothers Karamazov, the Idiots. Fyodor Dostoevsky lived in 19th century Russia. He was imprisoned by the Russian government because they didn't like people who sort of, you know, said bad things about the Russian government, you know. So he would say things that they didn't like, and along with thousands of others, they locked him up. So he thought, well, I'm in prison, I'm a writer, you know, no distractions here. So he wrote a book, and that's you can see the book that he wrote. He was released after a while. And one of the interesting things is that people who do creative stuff, when they're in difficult, bad positions, do frequently. You look at these people, and they do frequently get beyond circumstances, even when the circumstances seem impossible. I mean, try living in a cave in the Himalayas. Try being locked up for a murder that you never committed, you know. Try going up against the government of South Africa, etc., etc. And then a final one, Jean Genet. Now, Jean Genet was just a straightforward petty criminal. You know, there's no politics here. There's no spirituality here. You know, he was just a petty criminal in France. However, when he got finally busted big time and locked up, he thought, I may as well write that book I've been thinking about, and he did. The book came to the attention of a major philosopher of the period, Jean-Paul Sartre, and Jean-Paul Sartre lobbied for his release, lobbied for him to be recognised as a writer. That's not a bad game. And Milton Erickson. Now, anybody who knows NLP or anybody who knows us will know how much we love Milton Erickson. Many stories you could tell about him. This is the guy where they got the Milton model language from, and developed the NLP language patterns. This guy is an undoubted genius, major figure in the world of therapy in this century, and probably any century. One story about him, his own version of lockdown. When he was 17, he contracted polio, and he went into total paralysis. All he could move was his head. Went into, so not quite total, went into almost total paralysis. He was told, and his family were told by the doctors, that he would be dead by the morning. So Milton Erickson said, I am going to stay awake all night and see the sunrise. And if I see the sunrise, for NLP is the nice cause and effect pattern coming up, if I see the sunrise, that means that I will live. And so he did. So he stayed up all night and watched the sunrise, and he lived. Now, he didn't only live beyond 17, I believe he died in his 80s, 85, 86, something around there. And in the process of living the rest of that life, became fully able again, fully competent, able to move and do everything, became able to overcome his polio, and became this outstanding, he was already a psychiatrist, became an outstanding psychiatrist, psychologist, therapist, etc., etc. He did spend the latter part of his life in a wheelchair, the polio caught up with him, but that didn't stop him. So there's the first part of what we said we would deliver, some food for thought, as they say. Now, I want to give you some specific techniques here, things you can do right away. We can all do right away. So here's our key word: self-empowerment and transcendence. Self-empowerment, becoming more empowered, having more power. And even though you can still have more power within that situation. And let's always remember, the ultimate power is over yourself, is over your own emotions and your own mind. Everything else can come from that, which is what all these people have demonstrated again and again. And transcendence, or we might call it sometimes in therapy, we might call it dissociation, stepping out of. So here's some of the things. We have an A, B, and C. So we have happiness, 5 daily actions, which comes out of the positive psychology movement in Harvard University. Sean Acor is the key name to look for here, who created these things. The STOP technique, which has been around forever as far as I can tell, or at least as long as we've been doing this work. And there's a simple way. Remember that idea of the intervention coming in. Now, when we say bad experience, the bad experience was that you just decided to run the movie. It may not be that there's been a new lockdown. It may not be that a new bad thing has happened. The new bad thing may be just a tiny little thought that you have, maybe a certain mood or state you get into. And your choice is to make the intervention right there and then change it. Stop technique is excellent for that. Stop the movie. As soon as you see it's running, stop it. And let's put something else in its place. And then bilateral stimulation, nice simple technique related to kinesiology. This comes from Melissa Tiers, who I know many people know. Melissa Tiers wrote an excellent book, very thin book you can put in your jeans pocket, called The Anxiety Toolkit. Again, well worth having, especially in times of anxiety. And then finally, boost your immune system. Now let's just have a look at these in a little bit more detail. So here's the 5 daily actions. Now, if you do these 5 things every day, you might use up 20 minutes of your time. Use up longer if you like, depends how much time you've got, how much time you want to spend on it. But what they found in the Harvard research is that if you did these 5 things consistently for 21 days, you literally rewired your brain. Don't have time to say a lot about brain rewiring at the moment, but it's basically the idea that you literally create new neural pathways in your brain when you establish a new habit. Write 3 new things that you're grateful for each day. Just 3 things. Can be very short, very quick. Some people say just think about them. This is what Sean Acor said originally, write them, because that's a bit stronger than thinking. Can be anything. Just somebody smiled at you. You found a movie on Netflix that you didn't know was there. In the back of the cupboard, you had some organic sriracha sauce left over. You know, I mean, it could be anything at all. Just something that you feel grateful for. 2, write for 2 minutes about 1 positive experience you've had in the last 24 hours. These 2 can overlap, but you're just going to take one of these things and you can say, okay, I'm going to write about it. What does that do for me? You know, when I write about the fact that I noticed that my wife smiled at me, even though I'd just been nasty to her, what did that make me think of? What new synapses fired off in the brain? What new ideas did I have about things? The fact that that could happen. Exercise. Now, loads of people are all going, oh, I can't go to the gym. You can do push-ups, you can do jumping jacks, you can walk on the spot, you can do cross crawl. I don't know how many things there are you can do. Exercise works. Exercise changes your mental and emotional state. There's 1,000 things you can do. One of the interesting things I came across was the Canadian Air Force exercise book, which they created at this, during the Second World War. And they created it for people who only had 20 minutes. They created this for fighter pilots and bomber pilots in the Canadian Air Force living under severe stress conditions. And they created a system that took no more than 20 minutes and would work every muscle in your body. And you can just go on Kindle and you can get it. It's cheap, it's small. So it's just an idea. I mean, there's 1,000 ways to exercise. Choose your own, you know. I always say this to people in my therapy and coaching sessions, and they go, oh, I should be going to the gym. And I always just like to say to them, just do 10 push-ups now. Just don't complain to me about the gym. You know, do what you can do and do it now. And meditate. Now, of course, people have known, especially in places like India, not that there are any places like India, India is unique, but People have known for thousands of years about meditation. It works. It's that simple. Science has now proven it to work again and again and again. Now, when we say meditate, as far as I can tell, the absolute baseline, the ultimate concept underlying all meditation is that between each thought, there is space. And in that space is something else, something transcendent, something magnificent, something wonderful, something that can impart meaning and inspiration and everything else that anybody has ever wanted in their life, satisfaction, everything else. So at the simplest level, that's all it is. I think these are just my ideas. I've got them from a lot of places, but these are my ideas based on stuff I've read, teachers I've had, my own experiences. If you can spot the space and just go into the space, experience the space, and think of that diagram again of the line coming down and interfering the access point, instead of thinking that, I'm just going to go for the space in between. If you have had trouble sleeping, it's a great thing to do when you're just lying there. Go in there and just, okay, I'm not thinking this. I'm focusing on the space. After you've focused on the space for a while, probably there'll be a thought. You've noticed it's a thought, that means you've lost the space. Go back to the space. And of course, breathing is one of the easiest, best ways to do this. No special equipment, just breathe and then start focusing on your breath, because at the end of every breath, there is a space. And at the beginning of every breath is a space. And often you will find, if you practice this, that your thoughts and your breath tend to go along together in tandem. So if you can begin to control one, then you begin to control the other. And again, this is not news to the Indians on the webinar. This is not news to anybody who's done yoga, pranayama, meditation, and so on. This is old news. But modern science has caught up with it. But it can also be anything else. There are so many ways you can meditate. Find a piece of music that you love, that makes you feel good, and just sit and give it full attention. The fifth one in the Harvard system is random acts of kindness. Now that means just do something nice to somebody. Open an email and thank somebody that you forgot to thank, or tell them something nice that you should have told them and you didn't. Or if it's somebody who's actually in your vicinity, just do something nice for them, something that makes it easier. You know these things work. And here's the start technique. I'm going to invite you to do this quite quickly, because it can be done quickly. To do this, again, a lot of our students I know already do this. Just take a moment and close your eyes. Just close your eyes now and say to yourself in your mind the word stop. Take a deep breath in, and as you breathe out, relax your face, jaw, neck, shoulders, and hands. Take another deep breath. As you breathe out, relax down the front and back of your body, down your legs, to your feet, and into the ground. Imagine a powerful magnet or vacuum just below the soles of your feet that draws away from you any tension, tightness, bothersome thoughts. Now take 2 small, quiet, easy breaths. Now spend a few moments of mind quiet, focusing on something you enjoy, something you love, whether it's a relaxing thing or an energizing thing, something that's right for you now in this moment. And now bring your hands together and rub your palms to generate warmth and energy. Place them over your eyes for a second, and then open your eyes and come back into the room with a smile and a stretch. This is such a simple technique, and people invariably find it easy to do and effective. Here's the bilateral stimulation. This isn't a great video. I just did it yesterday in the hallway, but this is the technique. Think of the thing that troubles you. Think of the thing that bothers you, and as you do so, pass something from hand to hand, you will find that it's impossible to do both things at once.
Mute your microphones, please, if you're not speaking.
You will find that it's impossible.
Please mute your microphone. It's causing the rest of us not to be able to hear.
Yeah, I'll go with that. Thanks, Ingrid. You will find when you do this that it's impossible to focus on your bad state, on your bad feelings and your bad thoughts at the same time as you focus on this. It's going to have to be one or the other, and it's going to push you. I also recommend when you do it, open your arms as wide as you like. I could only go as far as the frame of the video, but you can go as wide as you like. It's a great technique, absolutely works. And do show other people. Now here's the final one. Boost your immune system. Now, something that's very weird about the COVID situation to me, the World Health Organization, with its knowledge, with its access to all medical research ever on the entire planet for 3,000 years could only come up with one thing: wash your hands. Now, this is something that my mum already knew. We didn't really need the World Health Organization for that. They were unable to come up with anything else. Now, it seems to me one of the obvious things you would tell people is boost your immune system. Now, I've suggested these three things for specific reasons. And the main reason I've suggested these three things is this. Because if you go to pubmed.gov, the US National Library of Medicine, you will find all the research on these three items. Now, these three items are absolutely guaranteed rock solid science. There's all sorts of other ideas people have about things, and I like to use other things too. I love echinacea. I like using echinacea, for example, but you won't find the rock solid science on it, whereas you will on these three things. So just for those people who go, oh, you know, it's superstition, or, you know, it's old wives' tales, we have the science. And then finally, a breathing technique. Breathing will boost your immune system. If you do certain breathing techniques, we recommend Wim Hof breathing method. And again, for the same reason, he has been researched by Radboud University in the Netherlands. They injected him with bacteria and it had no effect on him at all. It should have given him a fever. It should have made him cold. It should have put him in bed for a week, and it didn't, because by a breathing technique alone, he had created a powerful immune system. They said to him, you must be a freak. And he said, give me some other people, I'll teach him how to do it. They gave him some other people, he taught them how to do it. Within 2 weeks, they gave them the bacterium and nothing happened. So I really strongly recommend this. I believe Illuminations is going to give everybody this presentation, so you'll be able to check the references. These are the two big things to do. If you're going to do the vitamins and stuff, make sure the stuff you take is clean and pure. You don't want any dodgy chemicals or heavy metals in there. So that's just about everything I have to say about this. I think I've probably taken a bit too long, but I did have quite a few things I wanted to say. Now, let me see if I can get out of the chat window. If you have a question now, this would be the time to unmute your microphone and ask the question. I don't know if Illuminations are going to let me go on any longer. If you're listening, Illuminations, give me another 10 minutes. But if not, we'll just have to work with it. But you can always get back to me. Just contact Illuminations after this if you want to follow up. If you want to unmute your microphone now, please do so and ask a question. Well, I can't hear anything so far.
Could you go over the bilateral stimulation thing again? Because I didn't quite hear all of it.
Who's that? Is that someone I know?
It's Anne, yes.
Oh, hello, Anne. I thought it was somebody I knew. Yes. Okay, hang on. Let's see if we can just go back. It's ever so simple. And get Melissa Tia's book if you want more detail on it. So this is it. You just take an object. I've got an anti-EMF device that I'm doing it with, but you could be doing it with your car keys or a bottle or a glasses case or a cup. It really doesn't matter. The thing's not important. What you do is, so you notice my left hand is more or less in the center line of my body. This is what you're going to do. You're going to think of the thing that disturbs you. And I mean, this is great. Oh, sorry. Try that again. This is a great thing to teach your clients as well. Come on now, thank you. Get them to, or yourself, to think of the disturbing thing. Imagine the disturbing thing, you know, run a little video in your mind and then do this. And just keep doing it and doing it and doing it. And after usually quite a short time, you'll probably find you're smiling and you're not really bothered anymore. And sometimes people even don't know what the problem was anymore. Is that okay, or do you need more?
No, that was fine. It's just that there was interference the first time around with you talking with microphones, so I didn't hear it first time around. That's good. No, very good.
Yeah, get Melissa's book for the rundown, because she has. I think she chose the 6 best techniques, which is to say the fastest and most effective techniques. I mean, she's a New Yorker where everybody's stressed out in their mind 24 hours a day anyway, you know. So she wanted the 6 fastest techniques that would work anywhere, anytime, for any job.
Mm-hmm. That's good. Well, that's good. Very good. Thank you.
This buys you time.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Anything else anybody wants to know?
Hi, Phil. Hi, everyone. It's Irina. I just wanted to know which Dr. Heimer. I was trying to Google, and there are a lot of Dr. Heimers. What is his first name?
It's not Heimer, it's Hamer.
Hamer. And how would you spell that?
Hamer. Dr. Hamer.
All right. Okay. Well, thanks.
It's the New German Medicine.
New German Medicine. All right. Got that. Thank you.
And you will probably, if you research him, you might find some stuff about him being racist and a Nazi. And please ignore those things because there was a campaign. You know, the established medical profession didn't like his results at all, probably because they were. And so there was a big campaign to discredit him, and so they just threw anything at him they could. A bit like they do with the CCHR and Scientology, for those who are familiar with that.
Yes, interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a repeated story. You know, I like structures. I see the same structures again and again and again. One in the way that people make good, genuine discoveries, and two in the way that the people who don't like the new discoveries discredit them. Always seems to be the same old pattern over and over again. Makes you want to do this after a while.
True. True. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for the wonderful presentation. Thank you.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Indeed.
Anybody else? Well, it's looking like no, unless you're too shy. I'll leave you with the boost your immune system. So I'm just going to sit here for say a minute or so because I'm quite comfortable sitting here looking at myself. If I don't hear anything else in the next couple of minutes, then I'll just bid everybody goodbye, good night, good luck, good health, good fortune. And please go out there and do these things.
Thanks, Phil. That was great. Chat to you soon.
Okay, bye for now.
Do you know who this is?
Of course I do, it's Karina.
I just thought I'll keep you some company while you wait.
As well.
Thank you,
Sorry?
Phil. That was very good. We'll talk later. That's Anne, yeah?
Yes,
Bye.
I can see you, I can hear you. Feel free to leave now. Just
I
regard
will.
it's come to the time in the evening where you're ready to go home.
Thank you, Phil. That was great. This is Summer.
You're welcome. Okay, I'm going to say goodbye now. So you all know Illuminations. And
This is Asneer.
oh, Asneer. Hi, Asneer. How you doing?
Yeah, fine.
Yeah.
And it's good to hear your voice and see your picture. Thank you.
It's been a long time. I guess you're doing all these
Yeah.
things.
Yeah. What?
I imagine you're doing all these things already.
Yes.
Good. What we like to hear.
Some of it's like that book that you talked about in the beginning that you need to come back to.
What was that?
I said some of the things are like the book that you need to come back to, you know?
Which one?
Actually the bilateral stimulation.
Oh, that's Melissa Tiers. You know Melissa? Did you see
Oh,
her?
yes, I know. Yeah, I know her. But, you know, it's just, as you said, you know, sometimes you don't think about things and then you go, oh, yeah, remember that. I need to do that. So, yeah. I mean, stop technique I use all the time.
I'm so amazed at the things I said I was going to do 5 years ago and didn't get round to. And it's
Yes.
now than it was then, you know. It's called the Anti-Anxiety Toolkit.
Oh, yes, that's right. Yeah.
And it's got these 6 things in, which are all just, you know, they're really good. One is fast EFT. I forget what the other ones are because I only ever use this one. That's my favorite. I tend to do that.
Really?
I find the thing that I like and that really works, and then I do that.
Yes.
If it
Ditto.
doesn't work for somebody, then I'll think of something else.
Yeah. I like the fast tapping one as well. The fast EFT. I used to use that quite a lot at one point. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really wedded to the old style EFT. I really am. I don't know why, but you know, some things are just like that. It's like sort of preferring with gears, you know. I just like preferring writing to typing, you know. It's that kind of a thing.
Yes. Oh well, it's all good. All good.
Okay, I think it's probably time for me to wrap up now.
All right. Okay, Phil, thank you. Lovely to see you. Lovely to see you, Asni. Take care, everybody.
See everybody. Bye-bye.
Want to say hi, Phil?
Okay, thank you and see you soon.
See, I'm leaving. Somebody calls in.
Yeah, hello, Phil.
Let me see if I can find you. Where are you?
Yeah, you can find me. I'm in the UK.
Yeah, well,
That's your brother.
Right, okay, I've got your picture now. Yeah.
Hi, Phil. Nice
Hi.
presentation, mate, during the total anxiety madness time. Well done, mate. Enjoyed your presentation.
Good, I'm glad. I mean, a lot of people are so anxious, a lot of people are so worried, even frightened. And, you know, my understanding is that is really completely unnecessary.
Yeah. Oh, the paranoia here in Tavistock is ridiculous, Phil.
Yeah.
I'm out walking on the moors every day. It's wonderful. No people.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Just animals.
God. Should have made a break for it while I had the chance.
Hello, I have a question.
Who
Hi,
is-
I was very late or something.
Have I got a picture of somebody?
Yes, I'm very new here.
Hi.
Hi, Phil. Yeah, so my question is about the stop technique.
Yes.
Is it possible to use that before bedtime?
Before bedtime?
Yeah,
Really good idea. Hang on, I'm just looking for it for you.
because
Yeah.
I know from one of, I think it was from this lady's book, The Secret, it says that at night before you sleep, your last thoughts is very important.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Well,
but then is it possible to use the stop technique to,
absolutely. Yeah.
how, I don't know, could
Yeah,
you like,
you can use it any time at all. That thing about your last thought being important, the first thought being important, again, this is a concept that's been around for literally thousands of years. You know, this is why traditionally people would meditate first thing in the morning, last thing at night, to make sure that they had something positive going on, something good going on through the day or things. So yeah, use it anytime and every time. It always works. It's a great way to relax. It's a great way to just stop the automatic processes of thinking that we have.
okay, all right, thank you.
You're welcome. I'm going to make another attempt to leave now. There goes.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
See ya. You're welcome.
Bye for now. Thanks again.